Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm your host, Glenn Smith, and the topic of today's show is auto insurance. With me is our guest, Brian Strong, a partner at KBG Injury Law. Brian's also the president of the York County Bar Association. So welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Glenn.
Okay, so we're talking about auto insurance. What is auto insurance?
Well, generally, Glenn, people don't think of it really this as a law, but there's actually a law out there that requires you to purchase automobile insurance as long as you have a registered motor vehicle. And your car insurance is the insurance that covers you if you are the one who is at fault, or if you are injured or your property is damaged through the fault of someone else. The type of insurance you select also affects what you're able to do with respect to that claim.
Now, does this law tell me what I need to have?
Yes, it's actually a very wordy law. It's called the Pennsylvania Motor Vehicle Financial Responsibility Act. And it does have all sorts of requirements in there, ranging from the minimum amount of insurance required to the minimum amount of other benefits required, such as medical benefits that you're required to have on your automobile insurance. So, for example, in Pennsylvania, the minimum amount of insurance that you can have to be legal on the road is only $15,000 of liability insurance. It's a very small amount. It's one of the smallest in the country and has not been changed since 1991.
In your experience, if I'm getting the minimum coverage on my automobile insurance, does that really protect me?
Not really. It's understandable that certain people, whether because of economic reasons or they're young and just getting started out, may want to get the most skeletal policy they can to keep it cheap. But the old saying is you get what you pay for. And as a rule of thumb, I do not recommend getting minimum insurance amounts because it just leaves you exposed on a variety of levels.
So some of the things that this $15,000 covers, it's essentially if I do something that causes me to get sued, right?
Well, not always sued, but that I think sued is a term that people get concerned about. Most automobile claims never result in any litigation, so there's really technically no one's being sued. Yes, a claim may be pursued by someone because, say, you rear-ended them and you damaged their vehicle. They may pursue a claim, but because it was clearly someone else's fault, there's really no dispute. That claim gets resolved and never results in anyone getting sued. But there's a claim that was presented. There's a lot of, if it's okay, I'd like to go through the basic, there's a couple of main categories when it comes to car insurance that a lot of people think of the liability, which we were just discussing. But when you purchase car insurance, you really have a couple decisions to make. The first big one is really the level of liability coverage that you have. As I said, $15,000 is the minimum amount that you can purchase. But you can select levels up to even $1 million in coverage, which is probably unnecessary for most people to go that high. Probably the most common level that I see out there for people who are kind of on their way and being responsible is a $100,000 policy. That usually is an appropriate level of coverage for the average person. So that's a decision you have to make. Probably the second biggest decision you have to make is the amount of medical benefits that you have on your policy. Every car policy in Pennsylvania is required to have a medical benefit on it. And the minimum allowed by law is $5,000, but you can select levels up to $100,000 in medical benefits. And this always sounds weird to people, but when you're in a car accident, even if it's the other person's fault, your car insurance's medical benefit is what will cover you for your medical bills. So I do not recommend picking the minimum amount of insurance because it's only $5,000 and that goes away real quick. I recommend choosing higher levels of medical benefits. Medical benefits in a car claim are like the Cadillac of medical benefits. There's no copay, there's no network, there's no anything. As long as your treatment is related to the car accident, your car insurance will pay, no questions asked. So it's good to have better than minimum on the medical benefit. And then the final real big decision maker on when choosing your car insurance is what we loosely call U coverage. And U stands for uninsured motorist coverage and underinsured motorist coverage. Uninsured motorist coverage protects you if you're injured or your car is run into, property damage, whatever, by an uninsured motorist. And believe it or not, there's a lot of people out there driving around without insurance. And if you don't have uninsured motorist coverage, you're going to be out of luck because you cannot make an insurance claim if you don't have that. Underinsured motorist coverage is to protect you from all those people who are driving out there with $15,000 policies because they're underinsured, and if they cause more than $15,000 in harm to you, and that's where your underinsurance motorist coverage kicks in. And I always think of it as you coverage protects you, whereas the liability coverage is protecting other people. So you don't want to skimp on the part of your policy that protects you. And oh, by the way, the decisions you make on your car insurance don't affect just you. It affects your family members, so your wife, your children, and anyone who's on the policy. Even if your children are not of age driving, they're still considered insureds under that policy, and your decision would affect them.
One of the questions I get asked a lot is, if I'm going to drive somebody else's car, whose insurance applies? Is it my insurance that I had purchased, or is it the owner of that car's insurance that would cover if something happens?
Yeah. Generally, this would fall into the category of permissive use. So if you're driving, say, my car with my permission, I say, hey, Glenn, go down to the gas station and fill up my car, please, I'm busy. You drive my car down to the sheets or the rudders or whatever, and you rear end someone. Because you're using my car with my permission, my insurance would be the first in line. If you cause catastrophic loss to someone and there's just huge damages, your insurance, even though your car was not involved in the accident, would act as a second level of coverage under that fact pattern. Of course, if you're not using my car, if you're using my car without my permission, then my insurance would not be applicable. They would deny that claim because even if we're friends and you just grabbed my keys and took my car without asking me, that would be a non-permissive use situation and my insurance would not cover.
Now, we talked a little bit about the medical coverage that you have on there. Is there any interplay between the medical coverage on automobile insurance and your health insurance?
Well, sort of. So the frontline coverage for any injury or treatment you have arising from a car accident coverage is always going to be your car insurance coverage. So from zero up until whatever level of coverage you chose is going to be your auto coverage. Once your auto coverage is exhausted, whatever health insurance you have in play would be second in line. But they would not pick up, say you had a $10,000 auto benefit, they would not pick up until $10,001, which is why you want to amplify or maximize your auto medical benefit, because unlike auto benefits, which I told you is like the Cadillac of health coverage, most people's health insurance comes with deductibles, co-pays, networks, and all sorts of things that you don't have to deal with your auto coverage. So if you have a nice solid auto coverage on the medical side, you don't have to worry about all the normal stuff you got to deal with when it comes to your health insurance. I recommend $100,000 in medical benefits on your auto policy. And when you look at your bill when it comes in the mail, you would be, or get a quote from your agent, you would be surprised at how cheap auto medical benefit is. To go from a $5,000 coverage to $100,000 is really not that much more. And if you think about it, it's really one of the most affordable ways to have some health benefits. And I always look at it this way too. If you're young and relatively healthy, one of the most statistically significant situations that you find yourself in that you may get injured is when you drive your car, and that's something that most people do every day, and so you should really think about protecting yourself with a medical benefit.
Really good tip, Brian. So, like most people, I think they've bought their insurance years ago, and whether it's an auto pay or they're writing a check on a monthly, quarterly, semi-annual basis, you don't remember what you have anymore. Is there an easy way to figure out what kind of coverage you currently have?
Sure. Most people are on a 6-month plan where they every 6 months get a renewal for their auto insurance. Some people are on an annual basis where you get it once a year. But in any event, when you get your renewal, it comes with a summary that's right at the front when you open the envelope. It's called a declaration page. And the declaration page does lay out the types of coverage you have and in what amounts and what you're paying. Even if you don't understand it, because admittedly I've read hundreds and hundreds of these, sometimes they're not easy to decipher. Your insurance agent should be able to do that for you. And quite frankly, like any attorney at my firm, I tell people all the time, we are happy to review insurance coverages. We don't charge for that. I would prefer to give people some insight on what coverage they have before they need it, as opposed to the many times I've sat in my office explaining to people that, look, a choice you made when you were 25 years old, 20 years ago, is now going to affect what you're able to do today. So yeah, you either read it, make sure you understand it, or you ask someone who knows, and most people, insurance agents or lawyers, are going to look at that at no cost.
So your auto insurance policy, your declaration page, is something you should review frequently.
Well, every time it comes in the mail, you should look at it. I do, just to make sure that there's not a mistake on it, because even if it's not an intentional mistake, humans being humans, errors occur. So I look at mine carefully every time it comes.
So for me, one of the more confusing things that I find on my statement is this thing about torts.
Yeah,
there's two different types of tort, right?
Let's talk about that. So back in 1991, when the Pennsylvania Motor Vehicle Financial Responsibility Act was passed, they introduced the concept of full tort and limited tort, and that's T-O-R-T. I often get people calling it torque, like a wrench, but it's tort. When you choose your auto insurance, you have to decide if you want full tort or limited tort. By default, you automatically have full tort unless you assertively change to limited tort, and the only way you do that is by signing a form that explains to you what you're doing, although it does so in a very wordy manner, and most people read that form and don't really understand it. The general way you should think about it is, first of all, I recommend that every single person have full tort. It is about, on average, 10% more expensive than a limited tort policy. So you do save a little money by going with limited tort. But remember when I said earlier, you get what you pay for. If you choose limited tort, you are giving up your right to pursue a claim against the negligent party for losses that you suffered from, caused through no fault of your own. And you give up almost any right to make a personal injury claim, and you give up other rights as well. You do maintain under limited tort the right to pursue out-of-pocket expenses, like wage loss and things like that. But the big one is you give up your right to pursue a claim for a personal injury. A lot of people will say, well, I'm not the suing type, or I'm not sue happy or whatever, to which I say, most people aren't. In fact, I'd say the vast, vast majority of people are not that way. But why give up a legal right that is yours until you make a decision later? After you have that right, you can still say, I don't want to pursue that. But by doing it at the beginning, by choosing limited tort, you give up your right. And I sit with a lot of people, either in my office or telephone conferences where I'm consulting with people, and I have to say to them, look, I'd love to help you. I know you're hurt through no fault of your own, and I know this has caused great disruption in your life, but because you chose limited tort, I can't help you. So I just recommend to everyone, full tort is really the only way to go. And again, your decision affects your children, your wife, or your husband. So I do not recommend limited tort.
And just for clarification, you said for personal injury. Mm-hmm. So a limited tort would preclude me from suing somebody from personal injury. Hopefully I didn't hit my mic too hard there. When we talk about personal injury, what are we really talking about?
Yeah, so I always sort of think of it as a negligence claim in general, and most people know what the word negligence means. It means exactly what you think it means. So if someone is careless and they cause you harm, I usually think of the harm being broken into two different categories. There's sort of the out-of-pocket category, which is wage loss or co-pays or medical bills or things out of your pocket. Limited tort, full tort, you can make that claim regardless. On the other side is the personal injury claim. And there the law recognizes that if you've been injured through somebody else's negligence, you're entitled to be compensated for what you went through. And that sometimes is called pain and suffering, sometimes it's called emotional distress. It's kind of a vague concept, but basically the law says, and it's logic attached to it, the bigger the injury, the bigger the harm, the bigger the value a case may have, the smaller the injury, the smaller the disruption in your life, the smaller the value. But the law recognizes that it's a loss caused by somebody else's negligence, and you're entitled to be compensated for that.
Okay, Brian, thank you so much. Well, we're going to take a break here, and we'll be back in just a few moments. You're listening to Legal Lines. I'm Glenn Smith, and I'm here with Brian Strong, and we're talking about auto insurance. back to Legal Lines. I'm your host, Glenn Smith, and I'm with Brian Strong, a partner at KBG Personal Injury, and also president of the Bar Association. And we're here today talking about auto insurance. So Brian, first half of this show, we talked a little bit about policies and different coverages and things of that nature. So now that we have our insurance policy, we're out there driving, and all of a sudden, I get into an accident. What's the first thing that I should do?
Well, first of all, I would say you should think about your safety. So, of course, if you're in the middle of a busy road, once the cars stop moving, you should think about, is it safe to move get out of the car and talk to the other driver and things of that nature. Normally, traffic will stop and you'll be able to eventually, if you're not seriously injured, get out of your car. And so whether it's your fault or the other driver's fault, the first thing that I would encourage people to do, your heart's racing, your adrenaline's pumping, is do your best to keep calm. Being angry doesn't help anybody. Accidents happen, and that's why they call them accidents. It's not like someone tried to rear-end you or whatever. So to the extent that you can remain calm, that's a good piece of advice. I would also recommend, for all but the most minimal of car accidents, is that you call the police. Everyone's carrying a phone nowadays. Hopefully you weren't on the phone when the accident happened, but everyone has a phone readily available to them nowadays, most everyone. Call 911 and get the police out there to document what happened. Eventually you should interact with the other driver. Hopefully the other driver is being a polite citizen just like you, and you're able to start exchanging information. In my experience, the at-fault person normally gets out of their car and says, "Oh my God, I'm sorry, are you okay?" And that's most everybody. There's always the exception, but most people are like, "I'm so sorry, I didn't see you," and almost always readily admit that it's their fault. Sometimes it gets contentious and someone's like, "What were you doing? The light was red," and you're going to say, "No, it wasn't, it was green." And if there's a dispute like that, I recommend you just get back in your car and wait for the police to arrive and let them sort it out. Other helpful hints at an accident scene, assuming you're physically able to do so, is take pictures. Take pictures of the property damage to your car so you can document what happened. Take pictures of the locations of the vehicles so now that's documented, and things of that nature. Eventually, the dust is going to settle enough that you're going to leave the accident scene, and that's when you need to report the accident to your own car insurance, even if the accident wasn't your fault. Remember, we talked about how your car insurance is going to be responsible for the medical bills. You've got to call your own car insurance to report the claim, and then they will get the process rolling.
Is there some type of deadline that one has in order to file a claim? I got into an accident. I don't have my right state of mind about me, or maybe I had to go to the hospital. Is there a too late to file a claim with my insurance company?
Yeah, I think the rule generally may vary slightly by policy, but in general you're going to think of a 30-day limitation. And even then, if you do it after the 30 days, I don't think they can deny your coverage unless they can show that the delay affected them to the negative. But generally you should call within, 24 to 48 hours. There are times when someone is seriously injured and they're physically incapable of doing that, and there's more important things to worry about, so even the spouse or loved one isn't going to call it in either. But even under those circumstances, still within 2 or 3 or 4 days, you should make the call.
Do you find that if the police are called that they often file a report?
Almost always, and it varies by department. I think there's something like 23 different police departments in York County, Pennsylvania. Some are a little more formal than others, but generally, if there should at least be a form filled out that's called a exchange of information form, where they document the name of the other driver, the name of their insurance company, and the policy number. And that should be the minimum that happens if the police arrive at an accident scene.
Is it okay for me to give a statement to the police about the accident?
Yeah.
That could be used against me, perhaps.
Well, it's going to be contained in the police report, but I mean, as a general rule of thumb, especially if the accident was not your fault, you want to tell the police your side of the story. Without getting into the criminal law aspects, if you've been drinking or violating some other rules, there may be reasons why you may want to say, I don't want to say anything, but that's not what we're here to talk about today.
That's right. That's another topic for another day. Absolutely. So one of the other things that happens on occasion is you get into an accident and the other car flees.
Yep.
What do you do?
Well, that's why hopefully you have good insurance because, and this will give me a segue into property damage claims. So, you're rear-ended, it's the most common form of a car accident. And like you said, the other driver backs up and screeches off. You don't get their license plate number. They're never to be found. This is why it's important that you have property damage coverage on your car, no matter what. Even if you have a 1999 Ford Escort that's 20 years old and has 200,000 miles on it, and you're like, the car's only worth $600. I still think you should have property damage coverage on that car because if someone hit and runs a scenario with your car and you don't have property damage coverage, even though it wasn't your fault, you're out of luck. That's also where the uninsured motorist coverage comes in. If a hit-and-run driver hits you and flees, that vehicle is considered a phantom vehicle, is what they call it. And even though that car may have had insurance, it's considered an uninsured motorist, and therefore, if you have the appropriate uninsured motorist coverage, you can still make a claim.
So, using your scenario, if I have my old beater car, I should still have good coverage on there because I want to protect myself and my property. Do I get reimbursed or do I get coverage from my insurance company for the value of that car? Because I have to go get a new car now.
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yes, and this is a good question because I get this a lot. People need to understand that you're not insured for replacement cost. You're insured for the actual value of the vehicle. So if you think your vehicle is a piece of property that you own and someone else through their negligence destroys that property, if that property was worth $600, like the Ford Escort in our example, that's what you're entitled to. Even though you may say, I can't find another 1999 Ford Escort, the law envisions that scenario that that's exactly what you should do with the $600. You should go find the exact same car and buy it with that money. Excuse me. The other thing to think about with property damage is, again, if it's not your fault, you actually have a choice. You can go through, excuse me, you can go through your own coverage or the at-fault parties coverage. Most people go through the at-fault parties coverage, sorry, Glenn, because they don't want to incur a deductible. But a lot of times you go through the at-fault parties insurance and you find that the adjuster's not being all that nice to you. You find it to be a really stressful situation, whereas your own insurance is going to be much more cooperative with you. So you say, you know what, I'm going to go through my own insurance. And let's say you have $5,000 worth of damage to your car, but you have a $500 deductible. What would happen under that scenario is your insurance company would not pay you $5,000, they would pay you $4,500. You would incur that $500 deductible, but your insurance company would go to the other insurance company and get the $5,000 back, keep the $4,500 that they paid you, and then give you your $500 deductible back. So you'd only be out your deductible for a short period of time. So some people, probably about 25% of the time, I would say people go through their own insurance because I don't want to deal with the other guy, so I'm going to deal with my people.
So for the insurance companies, are they working for me, my insurance company? Because when we're talking about, working with insurance companies, it's not always the easiest thing to do. And I know many times you feel like you're fighting with your own insurance company to have either the representation or the coverage that you think you should get. How's that play out?
Sure. So it's most car accidents, there's two insurance companies involved. One is yours, one is the other person's. Your own insurance actually has a duty to treat you with good faith. There's a law in Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Bad Faith Insurance Act, which says that insurance companies have an implied duty of good faith. So when you're dealing with your own insurance company, they do have a duty to treat you with good faith. And by the way, they want to usually. You're their customer and they want to keep you happy and so forth. So for the most part, your own insurance company is going to treat you a little differently than the other insurance company because not only should they because of the law, but they want to because they want to keep you as a customer. Likewise, the bad guy's insurance company, the person who rear-ended you, they don't have a duty to you at all. They have no duty to be fair to you. They have no duty to do anything except resolve the claim in the best interest of their person. So a lot of times the at-fault parties, insurance adjusters will call you, and you may think they're super nice guy being friendly and all that stuff, but keep in mind that they don't have any duty to you whatsoever, whereas your insurance company does.
So we talked about what happens if my car is totaled, if it's going to be based on the fair value of the car at the time of the accident. My car isn't totaled, but it does need some repair work. Are there any benefits that I can get to help me out with that, because my car is off the road now?
Yes, there's two ways that can happen. The way to make sure it happens is when you're purchasing your insurance, one of the things we didn't talk about is car rental coverage. That's another option you can pick when choosing your insurance. It's a good idea to have it, unless you have a spare beater car or third vehicle that you can fall back on. If your car is off the road for a few weeks while it's being repaired, one way to guarantee that you have a coverage is to pay for car rental coverage on your car insurance. And most policies cover for like a 30-day period, which is usually more than enough if a car is being repaired. If you don't have car insurance coverage, which is not mandatory, so a lot of people skimp on that one. They'll say, well, I'm going to save the money and not have car insurance coverage. If you're lucky, the person who caused the accident has car rental coverage on their policy. And if they do, you can tap into that. But if they don't, so if you don't have it and the other side doesn't have it, you're on your own. You're going to pay for that car rental coverage. You're going to keep good records and note it as an out-of-pocket expense. And eventually, but not until the end of the case, possibly months or even longer down the road, you'll get recouped. But it's much easier if you have car rental coverage on your own policy.
Now, how about I got banged up a little bit and I can't go to work for a while?
Yeah, wage loss is another non-mandatory coverage that you can choose to have on your policy. Unlike the car rental example if I just had, you're only going to get wage loss if you have it on your own policy. The other side won't pay your wage loss until the end of the case if you have a complete and global settlement of the case. And it's kind of weird rule the way they set it up in Pennsylvania. Wage loss coverage, on even if you have it, you get 0 for the first 5 days, and then they're responsible for 80% for day 6 forward with a cap of whatever level you selected. Insurance rule.
You got to love it.
Yeah.
So we're getting down to the end of our show here, Brian. The final question I want to ask you is, I'm in an accident. When should I seek representation?
That's a good question. And the answer is not every time. Okay, so I tell people, first of all, most attorneys who do personal injury like myself or any of other attorneys out there will tell you, and if you go to their websites and look at it, it always says free consultation. So if you're not sure, it can't hurt to call, because it's not going to cost you anything to call an attorney and say, do I need you? And there's a lot of phone calls I get where I say, no, you really don't. I'm happy to answer some basic questions, but you don't really need me. Good luck to you. But it can't hurt to call. There's free consultations. Most attorneys are going to be willing to take 5, 10, 15 minutes out of their time to talk to you. If it's a minor fender bender, everything's going well, do you really need an attorney? Probably not. If you start having issues or you're seriously injured and you have all sorts of questions, call a lawyer, and that's your best bet.
Wonderful. Brian, thank you so much. I appreciate you having here today. Well, you've been watching Legal Lines. I'm Glenn Smith, your host. My guest, Brian Strong, with KBG Injury Law. Thank you very much. Legal Lines is brought to you by the York County Bar Foundation, and we'll see you again soon.